Welcome to another episode of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, where your hosts, Tim Keefe and Andreas Wieman, delve into the intriguing world of alt-skilling in the age of AI. Tune in as they explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping customer experiences and the very nature of work, offering insightful discussions that bridge the gap between complex technology and practical application. Whether you're a tech enthusiast or a professional navigating the changing job landscape, this podcast promises to equip you with the insights needed to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving world. Join Tim and Andreas as they unpack the future of work, one fascinating episode at a time.
Hey everybody, welcome to another super fascinating discussion on the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast with my cellmate. They had actually bunked us up now, Tim Keefe. So we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting topic, reskilling. So Tim, let me softball that up for you. You want to knock that out?
Yeah, we went from co-conspirators to cellmates. I guess we had a trial in the middle someplace. I just don't want to know who has top bunk. Anyway, thanks, Andreas. I appreciate that. So one of the things that Andreas and I have been having a lot of, not just us, but I mean, everybody, you read any of the business articles and headlines of the last 2 years, and it's all been about artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is going to take all our jobs. I know Elon Musk was quoted at that just a couple of months ago saying all of our jobs are going to be done by artificial intelligence, which begs the question, who's going to pay for it all if we don't have jobs? But let's just set that to the side for a future podcast. But what I wanted to talk about today was, this concept of, for all of us at any point in our career, it's kind of like the landscape is constantly changing. And we got on this conversation about, as AI, particularly in the area of customer experience, which is our focus and employee experience, as AI already is starting to come into play, and has been in play for a while actually, to start to automate or take over some of the what I would call the simpler transactional types of contacts that we have, whether that's checking into a hotel or having a conversation or checking the status of your plane ticket or whatever it might be. We've gotten used to, we talk to bots all the time.
Yep.
And of course, before bots, it was IVRs, but of course that became known as voicemail jail, which was incorrect, but that didn't matter anyway. And what was that? People talked about voicemail jail. You called in and pressed 1 for service, 2 for sales, 3 for whatever. And you had bad prompts that were difficult to understand. You had broken links. And that was a poorly designed and managed digital journey.
Well, that's when you would smash a 0 like a million times to get to a human.
Or
right?
Pound or star until you finally broke through.
Figured it out.
The agent, right? And actually, if you went online, as the internet started to bloom, one of the first things that people started to publish on the internet were the hacks for various companies to actually get to a human agent. Some of the good ones were with like the utilities and with your telephone carrier and with your cable TV company. Yep. But now, of course, we call in, and now it's natural language recognition, or NLR, or natural language understanding, whichever acronym you want to use, that allows you to interact with what was an IVR. And now we're putting some generative AI into those tools to make them more natural language, in terms of that it's more conversational rather than what they used to call directed prompts. Say sales, or say renewal, or say cancel. Now they'll listen to the conversation and attempt to interpret what it is, and then they'll prompt you back and say, did you mean to say cancel your appointment? And you go, no, I want to renew. I agree with you that absolutely we can take care of that cancellation for you. And you're like, no. And then how do I stop?
I think that's actually a really good metaphor, because here's the way that I think about the potential that could have been, is the positive spin that I look at it psychologically.
Not person. Why get positive now?
Yeah, maybe there's hope for some of us. But if you think back to what that period you just described, like let's talk about, I don't know, like early mid 90s when IVR was kind of coming about. It had so much potential. The problem was everybody, from a business perspective, tried to like cram it down your throat. and it wasn't, they didn't really have the skill set to be anticipative of the consumers, largely, I'm going to speak a little generically here, consumer base that was going to interact with it. And that's why it had the backlash that it had. And so you didn't have the right people going in there doing the prompting and setting up the prompts the right way to have more of a natural language or natural consumer conversation flow. And so that's why it went the way that it went. And so as you fast forward to where we're at now, the way that you just described it, it makes me view it as we have the capabilities and tools now, and we have more of a mix generationally of a consumer base or folks that will make use of the technology. And I think it's being a little bit more embracive because of those pieces. But at the end of the day, whether you use, generated AI and visuals and NLP and NLUs, or in some other medium, right? There's a ton of potential with Gen AI, but you still gotta have the right humans that understand and interact with that have an understanding of the consumers of that. That's kind of the key of where I think the reskilling kind of comes into play. Does that make sense, or am I thinking about it differently?
No, I mean, it's funny. I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about this concept of, we went from analog where we talked to a human being, talk to a human being. I got an operator on a line. I told them what I wanted. They interpreted what I was screaming about to try and help me. Yep. And then we put an IVR in there because that was a great way to, better understand the customer need and route them to the right resource, or maybe in some cases actually address their problem right up front. Like, what's the balance in my bank account? That was almost the beginning of the digital interactions, right? Very digital. I was interacting with a keypad. I pressed 1 to get certain things. And then we shifted back a little bit to have an analog interface, but was still very much a digital behind the scenes, right? And there was a lot of studies done on what were the best ways to create those journeys, to design those journeys so that customers would get less frustrated and, go from the specific to the general rather than general to specific. And there were certain words to avoid, and, whether or not a male voice versus a female voice, was better under certain circumstances. I mean, it was a lot of, I don't know about you, but I sat through a lot of studies, and there were a lot of people who did work in this space. And actually were very valuable. But now, we have Gen AI coming in, and everybody's going, oh, okay, it's great. You just talk to the bot, and it's like talking to a human being. And you go, okay. But one of the things that we are seeing with generative AI is how you ask the question impacts the answer that you get. And there's this whole concept of prompt engineering, which is very much, in my mind, reminds me of what we were doing with, kind of IVR design, and that how you design the prompt. And again, this goes back to one of the things that you and I have been talking about out offline, which is, how do we go into an IVR environment and say, let's say we're giving customers prices for airline tickets. Right. So if the customer says, I want to fly from San Francisco to New York, and I want to fly on Monday morning, and the system comes back, and for whatever reason, there's a hallucination, which is, I don't have an answer, but I'm going to make up an answer for you. And this happened with another airline. I won't name who they are, but what happened was the IVR, or the AI prompted response to the customer, was the price for your ticket will be $10. And the customer said, awesome, I want to buy it. And the customer attempted to buy it, and then the system rejected it. And then this particular customer was annoyed enough that they took it to court. And the court ruled that the chat tool, whether it was a traditional IVR chatbot or a generative AI driven chatbot, really doesn't matter. But by the fact that it was acting as if it was an employee, therefore the company was on the hook for what it said. And therefore the guy could get the ticket for $10. I'm sure the trip was long past gone at that point, but it's all about, winning. But what's interesting here is then you start to, and those of us who played around with any of the generative AI tools, it can be kind of entertaining what it comes back with. There are the 2 lawyers who have attempted to save some money and do a brief, and the chatbot made up a few citations.
Yeah.
Didn't work out in their favor. In fact, I think they're actually their license to being admitted to that particular state bar is at risk as a result of that. So we've got to make sure that these conversations that we have get to the right result, right? And there's this whole machine learning concept, which is that we have to train the bot almost like we're training a human being. You and I talked a couple of months ago about Klarna, that Scandinavian payments company that made a big splash and said, we've introduced our generative AI driven customer front end, and we took, I think, 2.3 million transactions in chat. So let's be really clear, it was a very specific channel and saved the work of 700 headcount. It took them almost a year to train that bot to get to the level of accuracy that it could deliver those results.
Right.
So, you know, it's, and you and I think talked about that, like in the world of customer service agents, would be wonderful. We could train people for a year. We usually get a week or a day in some cases to train people on a new product.
Yeah, it's not realistic, but I think that goes into the right way to do it and the right way to train. And like I wasn't intimately involved obviously in what Klarna did and how they trained it, and they worked with OpenAI right on ChatGPT to do that. So it's more about the channel they were using in chat, right? But they had redirected, I think, voice interactions into chat, but they figured out what were the right conversational design paths and then the right prompts depending on their consumer base and the repetitiveness, the volume of what they're going to ask, how they're going to ask it, and then running the machine learning models on top of that to provide contextual analysis to say, okay, here's the chance, the percent of the chance of what they're asking, and this is how the Gen AI's got to respond. That's really what they did. There's more, specifics if anyone goes out there and like looks up how that pathway, that tech stack, if you will, is created. It's really fascinating, but they did it the right way. And look, it took them 12 months. And I love hearing sound bites from, CEOs, or even kind of scary, even like, let's say some CTOs or chief data officers and things like that. And they're going to come out with something that's comparable in a month or a quarter or something like that. Like, trust me, everybody in the world wishes it was that easy. It's not that easy. And at the end, you've got to make sure that when you ring fence the data that it's looking into, that it's rock solid, because that's when it starts getting into deeper machine learning models that apply hallucinations, and it just kind of makes stuff up that sounds like it's really, really credible because it's coded, that way. Right. And so anyways, I think the timeline and the association is really, really interesting. But to bring it back, because I want to sidetrack there a little bit, to bring it back to what you were talking about, is reskilling the people that are interacting, the employees that are interacting with the customers in some cases kind of, guiding them, I'll say, not necessarily reskilling them, or even using the term like we were talking about, before we started recording, upskilling. I look at those as interchangeable, because you have employees that have great characteristics, but just because they have a job title right now or a specialized degree, certification or experience in this field doesn't mean that there's interchangeable or skills that they can get reskilled with some upskilling to be more modernized for what we're facing right now with the current, I call it tech stack.
Yeah, well, and yes, and I think one of the things that's very interesting is, I'm going to really date myself here, but in the 70s and 80s, when we saw the evolution of automation come into manufacturing, there was this huge conversation going on in the United States about what's going to happen to that workforce that traditionally, went to the factory and welded these things all day long, every day. Well, that's now being done by a robot welder. What happens to that employee? Well, in a lot of cases, this was then an effort that was put on the companies to say, how are you going to reskill your workforce? Mm-hmm. Different time, different environment. This was very, a lot of these were represented employees, et cetera. Now we have let's call it, a white collar workforce that, traditionally we would say are a technical workforce that are very, very good at what they do, whether it's coding. By the way, coders themselves are somewhat at risk. You know, people who spent a huge part of their time learning how to be really good coders in a particular language, now more and more that is being taken over by some of these Gen AI tools. And of course, they're now creating no code tools that don't require coders, so that this can be put in the hands of, you know, non-coders, like people like myself, like in a business environment. So I think now the onus is on every individual to be saying, okay, what's coming tomorrow and how am I prepared for that, right? You just can't sit there and wait and expect that somebody else is going to take care of that for you. And I think what's fascinating to me, and I relatively recent stumbled upon this, but in order for Gen AI to work, you've got to have well-tagged, annotated data that is in its LLM, that it's using to, you know, to exercise on, and then use machine learning tools and prompt engineering to validate or improve its likelihood to get to the appropriate outcome. Well, that first step of that is, again, maybe a relatively low skill level, but it is a next skill or reskill or upskill from, let's say, for example, you and I spend a lot of time working with big contact center companies, 60,000, 40,000 employees. 5 years from now, are they still going to have that large number of people doing voice and chat interactions with their customers? I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I think a large portion of that is going to move on to these new tools. So those people who are earning a living doing that today, I think need to kind of start thinking about, are there new skills or new areas that I should be thinking about? One could be data annotation. Another could be prompt engineering, which require actually, which is kind of funny, labor to enable the bot, right? To enable the AI tool, we have to have humans that make the environment work for them. And I think that's one good example. But I guess the argument is it's got to be on the individual. Like there's going to be no magic wand where the government or employers are going to do this for you. It's going to be on each individual to be constantly going, how am I managing my career against the environment that I'm in? Because what I knew yesterday or the skill I knew, 10 years ago is completely worthless. I mean, I joke a lot about, and I spent a significant part of my youth learning how to navigate with a sextant and a stopwatch. I can guarantee you there's very little demand for that skill set right now.
But particularly for that. But if you think about how do you successfully use that in the moment when you need to use it, that critical thinking and applied critical thinking and logic and rationalization, that's a skill set that can get reskilled. You know what I mean? I think that's the mentality that everybody that you just described, 100%, by the way, 100% agree with you, and which is a very rarity, but 100% agree with you. And that, well, you're recording the podcast this time, right? We haven't just been talking to ourselves.
I think I hit the record button.
Yeah, well, let's double check it with your track record. But no, in all seriousness, I think you're right. People have to look at what is the objective value that they're going to be adding, and what is the natural inquisitiveness that they should have about themselves and their career, and what are the attributes that they feel strongly about that they can continue to, I call it polish. And what I mean is, how can you read up on things and go look at, how can I expand on my skill set here in this area? I like to ask questions. That is a skill set. People may look at that and be like, oh, well, dude's kind of annoying. He asks a lot of questions. That's actually a skill set. That's kind of where inquisitiveness comes from. And so you can pull on that thread a little bit and see how, what job roles or even just job functions have a relatability to that you can look at something that's interesting to you that you can learn about and figure out how you use that later on. You don't have to have, like, the question when they ask you when you're in school, what do you want to be when you grow up? I guarantee you, when I was in third grade and they asked me that question, there's no way in hell I'm like, oh, I want to be in call centers and I want to do, like, no way. I wanted to teach.
I thought you were in prison last time I checked.
Well, cut me some slack to let me record this. All right. By the way, I got 2 minutes. They just gave me the signal. But no, in all seriousness, like, don't have an idea about what's going to bring joy to you. So that way, when you're working, it's less of work and it's more of a hobby, but never lose that inquisitiveness because the environment is changing at a quick pace right now. And if you adapt, quicker than others that figure it out, and like, look, that's how competitions are going to work. Find a way to be inquisitive and harness that inquisitiveness for some measurable, objectively measurable value into what's going on right now.
Yep. Yep. Well, no, and I agree. And I also think on the flip side, as you look at, use the term loosely, but managers and executives that are in companies, they need to be thinking about how does their talent pool and skill set need to maybe evolve as well. Whereas,
Agreed.
5 years ago, it would have been, I need project managers with PMP certification and people with Python coding skills.
Right.
Maybe not so much next year, right? And, one of the things that you and I talk about all the time is that, we need project managers who take ownership for outcomes, which is less about, knowing a particular methodology, but more about, ownership and thinking outside the box. And on the other side, as I think about these journeys, right, like these interactions with customers, wherever they may occur, whether at a kiosk, in an app, in a big contact center, doesn't matter. I think what we're going to see is this need to bring people to the plate that maybe are a skill that we forgot. Just like this concept of script writing or creating a conversation. What does that look like? And how do you create a conversation that may even have an emotional content to it, depending on the tone that you want to take? Or one of the great human skills that I think is going to be really difficult and I could be wrong, I've been proven wrong many times, but I think will be a big challenge for AI is going to be that skill set of de-escalating. How do I work with a client that's in an extremely emotional space and try and get that down to a solution set? It may not be the solution set that meets everybody's needs, but it can be a difficult one. And not that I've ever been that upset customer on the phone, so I can't really identify. Of course I have. As you, I'm like a nightmare on a call. But I just think that as we think about whether it's reskilling, upskilling, maybe alt skilling, and maybe for all of us, at every level, rethinking about what we think are the critical skills and trying to look around the corner a little bit and say, what's coming and how do I align around that? And whether you're 20, 18 or 19 years old and thinking about your major, or you're in your mid-career and thinking about how do I move up into, if you're interested in management, or how do I continue to expand my role and my criticality as an individual contributor? But to do that, it's on all of us now. Nobody's going to do it for you. And I think that's really like the big key. We've got to go, what do I got to do differently? What practice do I need to think about? And what the other beauty, though, that now didn't exist when I was younger was we have so many resources on this.
Exactly.
Tools on understanding new evolutionary technology. There's just hours and hours and hours of free content. Now, some of it may not be as good as others, but just tons. And just this week alone, there was through LinkedIn, there were several people that were running free workshops on AI and prompt engineering and data annotation and all this concept, which is, I think, 3-4 years from now, going to be some of the dominant industries that are going on around the world. Yeah. Anyway.
No, I agree. And I'll kind of wrap it up though and give what just kind of came to my mind as an example. And I don't know if everybody would agree with this, but if you think about just the conversation we just had and reskilling, upskilling, alt skilling, I kind of like alt skilling. Maybe we should, I don't know, hashtag that or something. But if you think about the attributes, think about like if you're an 18 or 19-year-old, right? And you're a gamer, right? Not that I'm recording this on a gaming headset right now or anything like that, but you're a gamer and you play, open world games. Like I just downloaded the new Elden Ring Shadow of the Erd Tree last night. So, but if you think about the prompting that goes into those games, and you have to make individual choices, and the choices of those or the outcomes of those choices redirect the entire game in a lot of cases. But as the players interact with this environment, and it's more of a PvE, what we call a player versus environment um, scenario, the entire game can change, and the whole entire outcome of that game, the ending of that game, depending on the choices you made along the way, shifts. I'm on my like seventh playthrough of Elden Ring, as a matter of fact, and each time I've been able to get a different ending. It's gonna be different this time because I just got the DLC last night. But if you're a gamer, think about all of the hand-eye coordination that needs to go on while you're doing that, the critical thinking when you're in the moment of a battle with a boss or something like that, in the environmental circumstances that you're facing, and think about the choices that you make. All of that happens in a split second, whether you're, on Call of Duty or something else like that. All of those attributes, those are all characteristics that are transferable into other areas of business. It's not just, your passion for being a gamer and you're quote unquote wasting time for gaming. You can harness that passion back into critical thinking, applied logic, and data annotation, your attention to detail, and being able to be successful there. And you do that well enough, it leads to other career paths that you can develop along the way. So anyways, I'm gonna get super long with it, so I'm gonna wrap that up there, Tim.
No, I agree. And I think with that, I guess the final statement is, reskilling or alt skilling. I love that. We're going to hashtag that. But alt skilling is something we all need to pay attention to, again, regardless of where you are in your career. It's on you as an individual to pay attention to it and be thinking about where you are and where you're going and what you want to achieve. So with that, we want to say thank you for listening. We really appreciate the audience, and please subscribe. And with that, come and see us again soon. We have some interesting guests coming in the near future.
Yep, agreed. Hashtag alt skilling.